Hello everyone, Tom 10 here. Whether it's useful, whether it's not, I always try to create design which are ratio independable, meaning that they can adapt to any ratios I would want to, and that way I can easily add them into social media and all other accounts without manually adjusting that. It's not always possible. The more complicated design is, the more complex it is to achieve that, but at least thinking about that gives a bit of an edge to create that solution. So in this video, I will show you the main logic steps, what I do in order to achieve that. Hopefully this is something you can take away and start implementing in your own project. That said, let's jump ahead. This project breakdown series going deeper and deeper, and actually we are reaching the end. And in this video, I will just try to showcase you how ratio compatible solution might work in your situation, and you can just adapt something from that. So the idea is that whenever we change the composition boundaries and we are adapting it to different ratio, there are different ways of how we can take into account. One is through expressions, by applying expressions and making sure that the ratio is being contained. Other is through scripting, and third one is just through casual parenting. Here I will just showcase you how it would look like if we change it to square. So basically nothing actually changes because these are not directly related to manual change of the composition. Everything is pretty much done by making sure that scripting processes those fields. However, it's not that much important because I will showcase you the whole idea, how I see it work. So you could always try to make sure that some specific layer, let's just grab this one, counter. So you can see that this specific layer is linked to the bottom right, and whenever we change that bottom right, we are affecting its position. If we change this composition size to something towards the square, and I will showcase you two examples here. If we change it without affecting any anchor point, it changes from the center. So by default, we are getting loose of the focus here. If we want to avoid that, we're just setting the anchor point to the top left, and we are just making sure this is being changed. And you can see we already lost that layer, which was for the years counter. Now, whenever you change the composition size for scripting, it will take into account this top left corner by default. So keep that in mind when changing composition sizes, in case if you want to make any adjustments for the layers itself. In order to make sure that this layer gets in its actual place, we can do a few further things. As mentioned previously, you can always make sure that the composition ratio is dependable based on the expressions. So if we make this comp width, it will stick to 1920, and if we change this, we must make sure to just this one or the center one works fine, but just for example purposes, let's keep it this one. If we change it to 180, then we're making sure that it sticks. So this is expression-based execution. If we want to achieve the same thing accordingly without using expressions, so basically keeping it a bit less computation heavy, especially if you have a lot of layers, you can have controllers which reflects for each corner. Then you just link those layers towards the controllers for each corner, whichever corner it is closer to. Yeah, I believe it sounds complicated, but you can just divide the screen in 4 corners, for example, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, and then just link those layers to the corners which relates to that. And what you need to do then is just change position values of those layers during the execution of the script. So in that case, if let's say we would change the composition size through a script to square, then eventually we would also change this to 180, and it would adapt by simply parenting the value and without a need to use any expressions at all. So that's pretty much useful. Now to make this in practice and showcase how it would look like, so let's just make sure to change this to something else. So what I'm doing here, if you haven't seen previous videos, is comp settings is being picked up by the script, and it will use these values to set up composition size. In this specific case, I'm using only first element of this object, first key of the object in order to create the design. So I will just hit that button and it will build design. What I've showcased you here is that placement of elements can be related towards the actual controllers inside the composition you have created. But you should also take into account that it's not always the only thing you need to make sure to adapt properly. Simply because if you have compositions which have different boundaries and if they are bigger, you must take that into account as well by reducing their size or by reducing elements maximum allowed width, like I'm doing that with bars. So you can see that bars size of composition remains original, even though we have only 1080 composition width. But what I'm doing here dynamically is setting the boundary for design element to fit in, and you can see it doesn't extend towards the specific value which is being set by a script. So one case is that if you have only layers and you just need to make adjustments for them in the main composition, you are linking them either through expressions, by parenting to some controllers, or just by doing it through a script. If you have additional compositions inside the composition, then you must find a logic how to change the size of that comp in order to make sure the design sticks. You can see that intro composition, if we open up, so I'm just undoing what originally was in the boilerplate project by clicking Ctrl Z. So you can see that we have landscape project, and if I go redo and see how design build up, you can see that it's a portrait version and the composition size of this one has been changed. Now if we go one level deeper, we can see that here we have some reduced size of the composition width, and then for some reason lines are moved in free line. So it's not for unknown reason, it was done with idea in mind. Basically the script is trying to process what maximum allowance is available. So in this case 180 by 920. So portrait landscape, and that way it's taken into account the value and setting proper characters per line in order to fit that design. You just make sure that whenever you change the ratio, you adapt some compositions inside them, and you have various options. You can either reduce the size of that composition, you can either reduce the maximum allowance where the elements from that comp can go further, or you can just process everything through script and calculate it. Of course, you might say, hey, this is very simple approach. You just have those elements, nothing else moves around, nor the items in the scene changes much. But as long as you, during creation of a process, take into account the controllers inside that your design comp, everything can be achieved, and it can be downscaled if needed, it can be moved around even if it has a lot of movements, etc. As long as you take into account everything through a creation process of the elements, and definitely it requires some thought process in mind, you can achieve it. And that's what I'm going to recommend you to do. Just be thoughtful on what you do, and it doesn't matter whether it's bar chart race animation or any project you are creating. Make sure you have controllers and the thought process in mind, and you can achieve magical things. Good luck. And as always, thanks for your time, and I hope to see you